Let's talk about the architecture of Docker so you understand how it works. Docker uses a client-server architecture, so it has a client component that talks to a server component using a RESTful API. The server, also called the Docker engine, sits on the background and takes care of building and running Docker containers. Now, technically, a container is just a process, like other processes running on your computer. But it's a special kind of process, which we're going to talk about soon. Now, as I told you, unlike virtual machines, containers don't contain a full-blown operating system. Instead, all containers on a host share the operating system of the host. Now, more accurately, all these containers share the kernel of the host. What's a kernel? A kernel is the core of an operating system. It's like the engine of a car. It's the part that manages all applications as well as hardware resources like memory and CPU. Every operating system has its own kernel or engine, and these kernels have different APIs. That's why we cannot run a Windows application on Linux, because under the hood, this application needs to talk to the kernel of the underlying operating system, okay? So that means on a Linux machine, we can only run Linux containers because these containers need Linux. On a Windows machine, however, we can run both Windows and Linux containers because Windows 10 is now shipped with a custom-built Linux kernel. This is in addition to the Windows kernel that's always been in Windows. It's not a replacement. So with this Linux kernel, now we can run Linux applications natively on Windows. So on Windows, we can run both Linux and Windows containers. Our Windows containers share the Windows kernel, and our Linux containers share the Linux kernel, okay? Now, what about macOS? Well, macOS has its own kernel, which is different from Linux and Windows kernels, and this kernel does not have native support for containerized applications. So Docker on Mac uses a lightweight Linux virtual machine to run Linux containers. All right, enough about the architecture. Next, we're going to install Docker, and that's where the fun begins.